Show your support. Subscribe to the podcast. Hello, I am That British Guy and welcome back to NXT Talk, my podcast. Now this is episode 5 and as usual we're going to be talking about all things NXT in the run-up to Takeover Chicago in a few weeks' time. Now, before we start with that, just a few things to make you aware of for this month. Firstly, the podcast that will be in a couple of weeks' time on the Friday before Takeover will be a predictions show. So next week will be sort of the last week before Takeover where we're really discussing the ins and outs of the show itself. As I say, it will just be predictions only, and also later on in the month on my YouTube channel on the 26th of June I will be releasing a video where I will be reviewing the first ever NXT Takeover show. Now, I don't normally do reviews of old shows and old pay-per-views. I do a piece on the specific Raw tapings that are post certain pay-per-views, and I will be looking at King of the Ring 96, or more specifically the Raw after King of the Ring 96 on the 12th of June. But what I've decided to do is, in the months where we have a takeover show, is towards the end of that month look at an old takeover taping, because there's quite a few now. So I thought, why not start at the very beginning and look at the very first show, the show in which Charlotte and Natalya faced off for the vacant Women's Championship. But as I say, that will be on the 26th of June. So for now, let's dive into the events of this week's NXT. So, it was definitely a bad day to be a champion, unless you're the Undisputed Era, who didn't actually feature at all, which is quite rare. We got a mention of the fact that they will be facing Lorcan and Birch at Takeover Chicago, and we also found out that next week we will see Roderick Strong versus Danny Burch in a singles match, but other than that they didn't really feature at all, but the other two champions very much did. Now, Aleister Black opened the show with quite a short initial promo, to be honest. Granted, he's not one really for mic time, not because he has any issues with that, but mainly because of his character. He's very kind of dark, brooding, kind of standoffish type character, but was sort of building up himself and looking forward to Chicago and his first proper challenge, really. Obviously he did a few weeks ago face off against Eric Young when he was supposed to be defending the NXT Championship against Johnny Gargano before he got jumped. More on that later. But he hasn't really featured on NXT at all since New Orleans. He's not even really been in any other matches. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and sort of how his title reign kind of pans out, really, because it started quite coldly. He did kind of get met in the ring by Lars Sullivan, who won his handicap match against Ricochet and the Velveteen Dream last week. Again, more on that later. So after having words with William Regal, he announced that he is going to be the, as he put it, the first challenger for the title, but I'm pretty sure that the match against Eric Young was actually a title match. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was a title match. So I believe that would technically make him the second challenger, but there we go. And he talked Black up, saying about how dominant he's been, how he's sort of travelled all over the world for the last 15 so years, winning against all manner of men, but the reason that has happened is because he has never faced anyone like Lars Sullivan before, which technically isn't true, because the two of them were in that fatal four-way number one contenders match that Johnny Gargano won in order to get a title shot against Cien Almas at Philadelphia. So not quite sure they really worked that one out properly when they were kind of piecing together that, but I suppose one-on-one technically that is true. And yeah, quite surprisingly, Sullivan managed to catch the black mass before it hit him, and then slammed Aleister Black down to the mat, and decided to kind of pose with the NXT title belt. And that is not the last time we will see somebody who isn't the champion coming under possession of the belt itself. Now, I think I've not really got any issue with Sullivan having a title match. He's done quite a lot over the last few months, and has really kind of excelled in all manner of matches against any number of opponents, really. It just seems like a very weird first major title defence for Aleister Black, and because of what is going on with the whole Gargano Ciampa situation, it's kind of taken all of the shine away from the championship match, which is a little strange. It seems like that's very much taken a back seat ever since Philadelphia, really, when Gargano was involved in that match. Ever since sort of Ciampa's come back and they've obviously had their feud continue, it's kind of taken all of the shine away from pretty much anything else, including the NXT title itself, which is an odd position to place themselves in. So it would be nice if post Chicago we kind of put more emphasis on the NXT title and a real focus on making that kind of the main event, really, rather than a blood feud between friends turned enemies, which, as brilliant as it is, kind of feels like it should be the thing competing for the belt when it isn't. Now, jumping to the very end of the show, we saw the title match between Shayna Baszler and Dakota Kai, obviously for the women's title. And this was kind of started when Baszler made her sort of first proper appearance on NXT and injured Dakota Kai, so she was off TV for a couple of months. She has since come back after Baszler won the belt and has been on a bit of a roll, and Baszler has basically been sort of mocking her and putting her down and scaring her. And it took sort of a pep talk, if you like, from Nikki Cross to get Dakota Kai to face her fears and finally challenge Shayna Baszler to a match, and this obviously was the resultant match. It very much sort of built up on and played off of their previous match with Baszler sort of very much overpowering and managing to dominate Dakota Kai for the majority of the match. This time, instead of working over her arm, she was working over Kai's leg, so that she wasn't able to deliver so much of her kicks, which is obviously a big part of her offensive. And right up until the close to the end, it looked like pretty much a similar sort of match, really, whereby Baszler was just kind of toy with her, almost like a cat does with an injured bird, just kind of battering her around, throwing her around the ring, working on various body parts, just to inflict as much damage as is possible. However, in this match, Kai managed to kind of sneak an opening and kind of have Baszler on the ropes until she tried to hit her kind of double knee attack right near the end after delivering quite a few vicious high impact kicks in the corner, sort of Sami Zayn-esque. However, Baszler was able to sort of back her off and basically choke out Dakota Kai. I think they kind of called the end a little early because she was sort of flailing around with her arms, and the ref just kind of called it as a tap out, presumably because of what came after and the fact that they were probably running out of time. Now, after the match, Baszler was going to keep attacking Kai, and this is when Nikki Cross came down to the ring and was just kind of screaming in Baszler's face and very sort of bemused with it. And what she managed to do was take the women's title away from Baszler and kind of have it in the middle of the ring for her to come back in and try and take. And Baszler took the bait and kind of got worked into the corner, at which point Nikki Cross decided to make an impromptu match with Dakota Kai as the referee, slammed Baszler down to the mat and pinned, in inverted commas, Baszler for the belt and kind of made off with it, really. She hijacked the belt and is in possession of it as we speak, even though technically she is not the women's champion. Now, I presume in the next couple of weeks, obviously we've got 2 more shows before TakeOver. I'm presuming we will see Nikki Cross in a match next week, presumably sporting the belt, causing Shayna Baszler to basically demand the belt back. And I'm assuming it's going to be a case of a match between the two of them at TakeOver Chicago for the rightful ownership of that belt, which could be a very, very interesting match. It certainly seems like it's reason enough to keep Nikki Cross down in NXT rather than calling her up with the rest of Sanity, who, by the way, still haven't made an appearance on SmackDown Live, so why on earth were they in a rush to call them up when they had nothing for them? It is still a bit sad that she's being kept down in NXT while the rest of them are being called up to the main roster, but when they haven't got anything to do, I think she kind of is winning out of that situation. They had a very short time with the tag belts and got called up pretty quickly after New Year. They hadn't really done much after War Games, to be honest, mainly Killian Dane being involved in the ladder match at New Orleans. Pretty much the only thing really that they've done, apart from appear fleetingly in the Dusty Cup. And Nikki Cross has kind of won out, really, by being involved in the women's title program. So that could be very interesting. I still feel like we're working towards Shayna Baszler and Kairi Sane for SummerSlam weekend, but I don't know, that's just me. Maybe they'll try and hold off on that even longer. In which case, I do think if they do decide to do that feud, it does need to be for the belt, and it does then need to be Kairi Sane's time to win the belt and take it from Shayna Baszler, because she's kind of got her number. And we may even then see Shayna Baszler winning the belt back from Kairi Sane after that, to become, I believe, the first ever, or she would be the first ever two-time NXT Women's Champion. I believe that everyone that has dropped the belt has then been called up to the main roster and never managed to win the belt back, unlike the likes of Samoa Joe and Shinsuke Nakamura, that have managed to win the NXT title a couple of times. Not that there are many, though. Speaking of Kairi Sane, it was announced that she will have a rubber match against Lacey Evans next week. There was a backstage interview with Lacey Evans where she was sort of basically saying that she has now got one up on Kairi Sane and will ultimately win next week and win the feud. Maybe if Evans wins that and Nikki Cross wins the belt, we will see a program between the two of them, because I'm feeling like the Sane and Lacey Evans scenario is almost sort of a pseudo number one contendership program. But then there was a very, very strong emphasis placed on Bianca Belair this week as well, with a video package for her, so you can't really rule her out either. And then obviously we have the Candice LeRae angle, where she has announced on social media that she was okay after last week, but has basically decided to leave Johnny and Tommaso to their own doing. She doesn't want any more to do with that feud. She's kind of sick of where it's leading Johnny and doesn't want to be any part of it, which I think is probably the best thing, really. She sort of served her purpose in terms of their feud and needs to be seen as her own performer, with her own storylines, her own matchups, completely separate from Gargano. So hopefully this will lead to, again, her having a match next week, and her own program going forward post Chicago. Back to this week, we had a couple of pretty non-eventful matches towards the beginning of the show. The War Raiders faced a couple of enhancement talent, and yeah, it was an extended squash match, really. I kind of felt like it was going on too long. They were doing pretty similar to what Baszler ended up doing with Kai, of just kind of battering them around the ring and getting the opponents to tag each other in, just so that they had kind of fresh meat to destroy. It was alright. The crowd are into the War Raiders, as they should be, and I'm presuming they're going to move into a program with, or rather for the tag belts post Takeover Chicago, because they basically flattened everyone that they've come across, and that was played up quite heavily on commentary as well. They were kind of bigging up the fact that there's not really anyone else left for them to face apart from the title winners, whoever that will be between the Undisputed Era and Lorcan and Birch. I'm presuming it's going to be the Undisputed Era, and if that is the case, maybe it will be the numbers advantage of Undisputed Era that keep the War Raiders away from the tag belts for a little while. It's kind of the only logical reason for them to not just completely demolish the Undisputed Era, but who knows going forward. it seems like the creative team aren't quite sure what they need to do with the War Raiders yet, and are just kind of feeding enhancement talent to them just to give them some TV time and remind everyone that they're still there, really. They're very, very capable in the ring, and I can't believe it's because they need to get used to how to perform in that environment. I think it's more to just remind the audience that they are still there. After that, we had a match between EC3 and Fabian Eichner, who I think I mentioned a few episodes ago is effectively the NXT equivalent of what Dolph Ziggler was. If it wasn't him, it was probably Cassius Ohno, because they both seem to be fulfilling the same role of an established NXT guy that lays down for everybody else, especially when they sort of first enter the company or haven't had a feud for a while because of injury or just because they've kind of been repackaged, etc. Yeah, there wasn't really much to say about this match. I'm not really feeling it from EC3 personally. He's very capable. He knows his character. The crowd were chanting NX3 a hell of a lot during the match and during his entrance, which is really annoying because the speaking at the beginning has got so much popping in some of the words. Why they didn't re-record those bits, I don't know, because it's really, really annoying to hear. I think the most notable bit is the fact that during the match Johnny Gargano come out and announced that he has signed his contract for the street fight that he will be having with Tommaso Ciampa at TakeOver Chicago. So, yeah, that's kind of the most notable part of that match, really. It was announced at the very beginning of the show that Gargano and Ciampa would not be featuring this week, that their battles have kind of got too brutal, and William Regal has decided that they need time away from the show to be away from each other, which was a good way of kind of furthering the feud without us really having to feature, or them having to feature at all this week. Obviously we did get Gargano come out and show his contract to the crowd, so thus showing that he is very much up for that match, regardless of what Candice LeRae is saying. But yeah, it should be a very, very good match between the two of them. Possibly another 5-star match, and possibly another headline match for TakeOver Chicago. Whether we see Ciampa next week, or whether he kind of leaves it until the week before coming out with his contract, I'm not sure. Will be very interesting to see what happens with that. And yes, other than the video package, there's not really much added to their feud, really. Apart from really the Candice LeRae angle that I mentioned earlier. We did, however, get a very good match between Ricochet and Chris Dijak. This was kind of a showpiece for both of them, really. Dijak looked very, very strong, even though he didn't win. It was his first match, so to give him Ricochet as his first opponent shows that they must be quite big on him. Obviously, Ricochet, because he's going into a feud, or is in a feud with the Velveteen Dream, and will be having a match with him at TakeOver Chicago, there was no way he could really lose this match, but it wasn't all plain sailing for him. Midway through, he got slammed on the outside, and Dijak kind of took control for a little bit, and it was only a sort of a mistiming on a very impressive looking moonsault, although a little bit more height would probably be required in the future if he's going to hit that move often, because he very nearly landed on the top of his head. And that was kind of the opening that Ricochet needed to come back into the match and sort of finish Dijak off and win. And this is what brought out Velveteen Dream, who was very much still saying, anything that you can do, I can do better. Yes, I can understand why you want the spotlight on you. You are very, very good, but just know that when I am around, the spotlight will be on me and not you. And you just got a feeling that these two really, really enjoy working together, and crafting this feud together. There was just kind of a hint of glee behind their eyes. It was quite nice to see, and has really propelled Ricochet very, very high up the ladder, purely because he is in the ring with Velveteen Dream, who, other than Ciampa and Gargano, is probably at the top of the NXT roster, really, at the moment, which is saying something, considering he isn't holding and has never held a belt. It's very, very interesting to see, and that match, as well as the Gargano and Ciampa match, they will be the two standout matches, I would assume, for Chicago, and it won't be, unfortunately, Aleister Black's first major title defence on a pay-per-view show, which it kind of should be, but there we go. And it's very interesting, the massive differences between EC3 and Ricochet, who have both been, well, one of them in EC3 was already in the system, the WWE system, and got released and has come back, and Ricochet has been on their radar for many, many years, so they're aware of both of these men and have done all they can to bring them in. They both got put into the North American ladder match, which obviously neither of them won, but that was their debut match, which was a 5-star match. Ricochet outshone pretty much everyone in that match. I think I said it sort of closer to the time that EC3 didn't really do anything for me in that match either, and hasn't really done on NXT since appearing. Again, I like his character. He clearly knows his character and performs it very, very well, but it just doesn't really connect with me as much as it seems to connect with most of the crowd there. But that might just be a personal thing. I just think it's interesting that Ricochet has been given this top feud with one of the top guys on the roster, and EC3 is still kind of facing enhancement talent and kind of those Dolph Ziggler-y type characters that have been there for ages and not really done anything. So it will be very interesting to see what happens to both of those guys post Chicago, because I can really see potentially Ricochet moving into a program against Adam Cole, maybe, for the North American Championship. Maybe EC3 will work his way into that, and maybe Velveteen Dream will as well. Kind of playing more a tweener character than straight up heel. Obviously, Cole being a heel character works well with Ricochet, and they have, at least I would assume, I'm pretty confident that they will have faced each other in ring outside of WWE, so are probably very, very comfortable to work together with each other. But I don't see EC3 being elevated up to that kind of level straight after Takeover Chicago, whereas Ricochet will. Obviously, he's got a match there, and EC3 doesn't. Ricochet is fairly likely, I would have thought, to win that, because it's his first one-on-one feud. And again, Dream can kind of eat the loss, because he will still get presented in a very, very good way in that match. So yes, that's going to be one to kind of keep an eye on, I think, as the year progresses, when we get to the takeover in New York around WrestleMania 35 time, where Ricochet is on the card and where EC3 is on the card, and how their journey has been to get there will be a very, very interesting one. Because if things carry on along this trajectory, I think Ricochet is going to completely outshine, outclass and overshadow EC3 all the way there, and I would very much like it if he does. As I said, nothing against EC3 as a human being and as a performer. He's very good at what he does. It's not really connecting. He's kind of similar to Kona Reeves, really, for me. He's just not... I'm not really sure they know what they want to do with him, and how to present him to anyone. Incidentally, Kona Reeves, again, after that big kind of initial push of this guy is returning, again wasn't on the show. I know we're building towards Takeover Chicago, and again he doesn't have a match there either, so maybe it's going to be a case of see what happens post Chicago, because there are only so many matches that they can have, usually 5 or 6, and we've already got 4 pinned down and a likely 5th in Baszler and Cross, so there's not really going to be a lot of room to add those guys in now. But interesting indeed to see what happens with EC3, especially. Just looking at really those 6 guys that were in that ladder match, you had obviously Adam Cole, who was fairly established by then, who ended up pulling double duty, winning or being the inaugural champion of the North American Championship. You had Velveteen Dream being brilliant. You had Sullivan in that match, who has moved into a program for the NXT Championship. You had Killian Dane, who had been around for quite a while to that point and has been called up to the main roster. You had Ricochet, who is in a program with arguably the standout guy of that match in Velveteen Dream, and you have EC3, who's kind of not really been doing anything. So whether they kind of gave him that opportunity and he didn't show them everything that they wanted to see, and they've kind of put the brakes on things, who knows. It'll be interesting to see in months' time, as I said, how this develops going forward. And yes, that was NXT in a nutshell, really. As I said, not a good day to be a singles champion there. Black ended up getting laid out, as I said, and Sullivan posing with his belt. Yes, Baszler managed to retain her title, but as I said, there were chinks in the armour when Dakota Kai nearly made a surprise victory towards the end, and then obviously Nikki Cross managed to win, again in inverted commas, the NXT Women's title and has absconded with it. So yeah, not a good day to be a singles champion. But we do have, as I said, 2 more weeks before Takeover Chicago, so we'll see how things go from the Wednesday the 6th taping and the 13th. As I said at the beginning, the podcast after the 13th of June will just be a predictions podcast for all the matches, and kind of seeing how I think things will then progress beyond Takeover Chicago based on what I feel will happen results wise. We've got the review of the first ever NXT Takeover on my YouTube channel on the 26th of June, and obviously lots of other content on my YouTube channel as well. So if you like this podcast and want to see what I do in a video format, please check that out at That British Guy. Please also follow me on Twitter at Rightly Wrongly, and you can find me on Facebook as well, That British Guy 86. But until next time, I have been That British Guy, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.